have that available for later.
All right, I think you're on YouTube now.
Okay, so I guess I would just start with a hello and a welcome to everybody. And thank you for taking the time to do this with us. I really want to let you know that KSBN welcomes all of you who are new and want to congratulate you on your maybe new or continuing roles as program administrators for a nursing program here in Kansas. This orientation module is designed really as an introduction to your role as it relates to the Kansas Nurse Practice Act and the regulations there and how we interact together as administrators and KSBN. A little bit maybe of an introduction for me, for those of you who may not know me and my background, is I started out as a pediatric nurse for several years, did add some maternal child in there, eventually some OB work. But I also have background in quality and chronic disease management, and have also taught at the ADN, BSN, and LPN level. So do have that background as well. My most recent experience before coming to KSBN was back kind of in the managed care arena and working with mostly primary care in the Medicaid space and working with trying to get, I would call it more doctor-patient relationship, better relationships established for Medicaid providers. So that's kind of the space I've been in before I came to KSBN. And now as the education compliance officer, I've been able to meet most of you and have really had, this has really been a great experience. And you all have been very, very helpful in sharing what knowledge you have and have been very good about asking questions and getting answers that you need. So really appreciate all that you do. And we know that with COVID, there have been a lot of changes for you all in the last 6 months that maybe you could have never expected, and that you've all done really well in keeping things updated and asking questions and moving forward and doing the best for your students. And we really do appreciate that you do that. So with that, I'm going to try and figure out how to get my slides to go forward here. And excuse me just a minute while I'm technologically. There we go. So what I'm going to start with is kind of an overview of the KSBN, our mission and our functions, and then we'll go into how that relates to program administration. I thought I'd just start out today with what I consider a powerful message. You know, with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and all that's come up this week, I think it's a good reminder. I found several things of hers that I think are appropriate. But one of the things I think for right now too is we feel like sometimes we're fighting for every inch that we move forward, is that if you fight for the things that you care about, that will lead others to join you. And I think that's how I feel about a lot of what you all do when you really believe in something and you work together and you mentor and help each other. And I think it works really, really well. So I just thought I would put that in there as a reminder of where we can all go when we join forces. Okay, so kind of just to start with the reminder that the KSBN mission, that the mission of the Board of Nursing is to assure citizens of Kansas safe and competent practice by nurses and mental health technicians. And I think that's always a good reminder, because as in all the work that we're doing, we sometimes get student focused, and we do want to have care of them as we're thinking about this. But the reminder that what the board does has to do with the assurance to people that when we are looking at programs and approving programs, that it is also turning out nurses who are safe and competent in their practice. Won't dwell a lot on this, but just a reminder that we are authorized by our statutes, Kansas statutes for the Nurse Practice Act, and the governor to have the board, and that we do have an 11-member board that are all appointed by the governor. Just a tidbit for you all who may not know that how those are appointed is that on the governor's website, and I put a link there if you're interested, they have what they call the Office of Appointments, and you
Hey,
can.
Janelle, we can't see your screens. It's stuck on the overview of Kansas State Board Nursing slide. There we go. Yeah.
Sorry, it must be on. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So the board and committees, so the 11-member board is appointed by the governor, and they do that through the office appointments on the governor's website, and the link is there. You have the ability actually to put in an application and say that you're interested in the Board of Nursing. They have listed all the different boards, and the Board of Nursing is one of them. So that's the way you would make your interest known if that was something that you were interested in. So the board meets quarterly, and we have our different committees that also meet as part of the board. The one that I want to primarily talk about is going to be the Education Committee, but we do have the investigative that meets on Mondays. Mostly judicial, but there are parts of that meeting that are open for anybody. The education meeting, the continuing education meeting, practice IV therapy, and APRN committees that all meet on Tuesday, those are all open meetings as well, and you are invited. The Education Committee is usually a very busy and active committee. If you have anything being presented, we always encourage you to come, but we also encourage you to come just for the updates and the information and the things that are discussed by the board at those meetings. I can't tell that it's advancing. Did that go? Okay. For the board and committee meetings, those dates are found on the website. I actually, Colton, I was going to have you kind of review the website, wasn't I? I kind of left that out of my.
It's not a huge deal.
What?
I said it's not a huge deal.
Okay.
And so if you want, I can pull up the administrator portal and show them that part.
Okay. Why don't
And the board stuff.
I'm going to have Colton, if he could. Do I need to stop my sharing?
No, I should just be able to take it over.
Okay. I'm going to have him go to the KSBN website and just to give you an overview of a couple different places. But on the website, there is a tab that's for the board. And I've put the link here too to where the meeting schedule is. And we always keep that updated for about 3 years in advance so that those dates are known. Agendas and minutes, well, minutes won't be put out there, but agendas and upcoming meeting packets are put out on the website about a week before the meeting, so that you can get that information there.
All right.
So Colton's got the homepage pulled up. And this is under the board tab. So it gives you the schedule, and then you can go over it. Yeah, the schedule is there, and then the agenda and minutes for the ones that are already approved will be on there. When we do have it on site, it also gives you directions to where those meetings are held. The board packets, when they're posted, and those are usually just right before the meeting, will also be on there as well. And it will give you all the different committees, staff reports, and then for the main board meeting, the new business, that's separately, but all the committees are there.
Okay.
And then if you needed to know or wanted to know who the members are, you can also find that there. And it tells what their terms are and when people are coming up for appointment. The time on the board, they can serve up to 2 consecutive sessions, which are 4 years each. So somebody could potentially be on the board for up to 8 years in a single time frame.
Okay. After that, do you want to move over to the
Yes.
administrator resources?
Right. So the other big thing for you all, and we'll talk more about this as we go on, but for right now, I just want to show you is the education tab. If you go under there, there is the drop down for administrators. And then there are two things, the resources and then the annual report we'll talk about later too. But the resources are going to be the main page. So where the presentation that we're doing today will eventually be put, right now the nuts and bolts for new program administrators is the presentation from last year, and we do have a little bit of update to that, which I will post when we get done. I'm working on some different, more kind of how-tos for your toolkits. We have some things coming up with the change in the FQRs and that we're going to be talking about that I'm going to be putting under there that maybe we'll have a little bit more of a step-by-step or maybe even a short video for you to kind of help walk you through a process that may or may not be confusing to you. So there's also some resources we put for you about the current core curriculum, the alignments, some of the nursing groups that meet. We do have, we haven't updated recently, and I've been talking more with NCSBN about maybe getting some updates to our simulation. For those of you who are using simulation, we do have some scenarios there, but most of you have pretty much advanced, I think probably even beyond that at this point. But the right-hand side is really a big boost of information for you all. We have most everything that we use in our programs that we ask of you or that would be required for you to do as a program administrator are going to be here. So that would be in terms of your site visits, all the information for there, the guidelines that we use for programs, the documentation that we use for when we do a site visit are there. Different documents that we ask for within that are on here, the curriculum table, the faculty table. So there are some examples in there as well. Your faculty forms, we're going to talk more about that in detail, but we'll come back to that being our new online process. And then the major and minor curriculum change request forms are on here as well. What I will tell you about those is a lot of times I get requests on the curriculum forms. They're in a PDF. You can actually save that document from the website. And if you want to convert it to a Word document in order to fill it out electronically, you can do that. I sometimes have people ask me for the Word copy of that. If it doesn't work for you, you can always email me and ask me for it. But most of the time you can just download the PDF and then ask it to change it to a Word format for you, and it should work okay. So I think those are the two main pieces. I think maybe one other thing, Colton, if you could go to forms. Sometimes there are questions about where to find things that we might need for downloading. For your students, all the things on fingerprints and background checks are there. There is also a, I think under initial exam, Colton, if you could go there. Yeah, before transcript is there. And I think that's probably, I can't remember what's on the education drop down under other. I think that's mostly continuing education. Okay, so primarily I just want you to know we do have a page that has some forms. A lot of times students are looking for these, but that test before transcript form might be one that you would look for, and that is here under the initial exam on our forms page. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
All right.
Okay.
Any other things we want to go through on the website?
I think for now, we'll go back to the other, and we may come back to the website in a bit.
All righty.
Okay. Are you seeing, are we back to seeing?
I'm not seeing a share yet.
Okay.
Nope.
Are we good?
Yep.
All right, so I think we'll move from there. All right, so after looking at the whole board, I want to talk just a little bit about the education committee itself. For the membership of the committee, we do have a minimum of 3 board members that on the education committee, and that is per regulation. At least 2 of those need to be RNs that are in education. And then we also have at a minimum 4 non-board members, and those we have one of representing each of the types of education. So we have one who represents the PN programs, 1 ADN, 1 BSN, 1 APRN. And that is how we configure the education committee. When those positions come open, so I've told you that for the board, the governor appoints those. In terms of the non-board members that are on the education committee, those are ones that are chosen by the executive committee and our executive administrator. So usually when we have an opening that's either come up or becomes available, we put a form out on the website, and we usually try to let everybody know when there's an available spot. And then those forms are filled out and sent to the KSBN office. If there's an interest I have had some questions from folks about how you get involved with the board and the board committees. So that would be the way to do that. The purpose of the education committee is really to review and recommend revisions in the educational statutes and regulations for nursing. And that includes everything from we do have the mental health technicians that we also license up to the advanced practice. We also do review of educational policies for those programs. And we do a review of all the reports, evaluations, site visit reports, anything that comes from the School of Nursing that's part of our regulation that we look at and are reviewed by the committee and then by the board. So when you have a site visit done, those reports that are done, we always approve or complete those. You will have a chance to look at them before they come to the committee. Then the committee reviews everything. And if they have questions, they can ask that at that time. That's why we always ask that administrators attend the meeting if they can, because a lot of times if there are questions, it's best answered by the administrator. So those are the kind of things that we do. We're responsible for approving programs, initial and ongoing approval. We conduct the site visits. We review policies. We recommend approval for petitions, and that's for those that have not passed their licensure exam within the first 24 months. And we review and recommend approval for major curriculum changes as well. And that's what the committee, I shouldn't say we, that's what the committee is responsible for. So just at this point, I like to say too that in terms of nursing program questions, I put myself kind of as the primary contact. I am the compliance officer for the board. So I am the one who works primarily with the programs. Chelsea is our education administrative, senior administrative executive person. And she does a great job of answering questions, sometimes even before they get to me, but she has a lot of the information that you might need if I'm not available to answer those questions. Carol Moreland, who's the executive administrator, but also has background with education as well and is always willing to answer questions if you have them. If some things are coming up, I know oftentimes I get questions and I'm always glad to answer if I can or forward who need to, but Linda Davies is our practice specialist and is always willing to answer questions as they relate to practice or investigation. And she'll be doing a little bit more this afternoon in our update to talk about some things that they're doing with applications and review when there are legal things involved. So I think that she's a really good resource as well. But I'd like to put this slide in here, and this, like I said, the slides will be available on the website for you so that you have those contact pieces of contact information. In terms of licensing, and these are always seem to be important when you have questions from students, but Rayanne Bird is our licensing supervisor, and she's great with questions on licensing as well, or for anything licensing related. Karen McGill is the person who is primarily responsible for the NCLEX exam and for initial applications. So she's very knowledgeable there and usually is the one who's working with the graduates. Okay, so I think what I'd like to do is kind of get over into the regulatory side just a little bit and talk about how your job and the Nurse Practice Act, where they come together in probably the most concrete way. So on our website, you do have access to the Nurse Practice Act. And we didn't go to that portal, but I do have a link here. And what I will say is that we've done a little bit of updating. Right now, the Nurse Practice Act that you can download is actually the 2018 version. So if you download that whole thing, you'll get the whole Nurse Practice Act, but we do have some updates that have been done. And what we decided to do to kind of help with that is if you know that there's been a regulation that has been updated, or if you want to look for one that's been updated since 2018, we've put links to both the where you can go to get real-time updated regulations and statutes. And so that's on the website as well. We'll go back to that at some point. I'm not going to go there now, but it's just to let you know that it is there, but to also let you know that the downloaded version that's available, there have been updates to the IV therapy regulations, and I guess the education regulation update hasn't gone through yet. So that's the primary one that you'd want to be aware of. And the fee schedules have also been updated since that version was printed. So just to know that you can get access to the most recent by going through those websites. So in terms of the Kansas Nurse Practice Act, the regulations that are probably the main ones to look at are in 60-1, 102 through 108. 102 talks about approval procedures. It talks about the initial and then also the reapproval. The definitions, how we utilize or what definitions we utilize within the Nurse Practice Act. The reapproval requirements, the faculty and preceptor qualifications, the curriculum requirements, clinical resources, educational, student policies, and reports. And that's where we'll talk about each one of these a little bit more, but just to let you know, that's the 60-2 is where you're going to find a majority of that information. Also, for those of you who might have responsibility for advanced practice, for the advanced practice nursing, the education regulations are in 60-17. And again, it lists where the different reapproval, the faculty, all those things are duplicated then for the advanced practice in 60-17. So a little bit more about program administrator and what their responsibilities are related to these things. In general, the director, and there are some faculty accountability as well, but as the director, you are the primary conduit of information to your faculty, are accountable for complying with the board rules and the Nurse Practice Act. And one of the responsibilities of the director is to be knowledgeable about the rules and the Nurse Practice Act, and to make sure that the faculty members are also knowledgeable about those rules and how they impact what you do and what needs to be done for students and for the program just to keep it as an approved program. So a big responsibility for those that are already working with an approved program kind of come down to, I'm going to talk about some of the bigger pieces. So these are just some kind of the key responsibilities and things to keep in mind. You'll see some of these will, if you've had a site visit recently or coming due for one, these are all things that will come up as part of that review process. But one of the reasons I'm sharing some of these is that these are things that we tend to find where we come up with the most recommendations for programs is in these areas. And one of them is for orientation of new faculty. And when I say all, that means that your full-time, your part-time, and your adjunct faculty are all getting orientation. And not just orientation to the school and to the program, but there's also a piece of the orientation that has to do with their teaching and teaching responsibilities, especially if you've got a new faculty member who maybe doesn't have the educational background or hasn't had a lot of educational background in terms of teaching. And so I think those are big things that we're finding, that there might be sort of a plan, but to have a plan to make sure that your faculty is on board with the plan and that you have buy-in from your faculty that they have completed that orientation and have some documentation that they have completed that and have signed off that they feel like they've gotten the orientation that they need. Kind of going in with that, and though it's not a regulatory requirement, one of the things we're finding a lot of programs who are being very successful with their faculty and in their orientation is having a mentoring plan for new faculty. And that's for both their administrative and their teaching responsibilities. So it's always nice when you pair a experienced faculty with a newer faculty. Some programs have a lot of new faculty and that gets really, really challenging. So there are some resources that might be available in your broader community to help with mentoring as well. And that's where sometimes the meetings, the statewide meetings for programs are very helpful in that respect, is that we can find not only mentoring for you as a program director, meeting with other program directors, but also finding faculty members that are really good at mentoring new faculty into nursing and teaching. So curriculum is something that's being evaluated continuously, and to make sure that you're staying up to date with that. Making sure your faculty is included in that process of evaluation and of content. The other thing we're seeing is this, we're getting better about this, but a testing process that you have in place with some kind of testing analysis. Sometimes we find that that's not being done. We are really encouraging program administrators to look at what faculty are doing with testing, and to getting away from test banks is probably the biggest thing. So finding a way to work with faculty in development of a process and item writing and getting to a testing platform that is not coming out of some of the test banks. Just we know from experience are not good. They're maybe more easily found by students. They can get into those, and so sometimes that's an issue. And also they don't really cover the level of questions from, they tend to be much more knowledge-based, which is maybe not necessarily bad at the beginning, but as we start to level students up in the programs, then that testing and process becomes even more important, to have something that levels them up as well. And you've all done, I think we've had a lot in the last year or two on the next gen NCLEX exam and how they're going to be looking at testing. And so some ways we can begin to start using those ideas of clinical judgment and building that into testing process. And what it means by current policies per KAR 2-107 is just that we require certain policies to be in place for students, and to make sure those are all updated and that they're available for the students in their handbooks. And to make sure that all the policies, that if you have something different for nurses that is different from what the maybe other programs in your school have, to make sure those are really spelled out well in student handbooks for your nurses and your nursing students. And that was kind of my next point. So that make sure that you have a nursing faculty handbook and a nursing student handbook that are current, and that everything that they need to know is in there. And I just more to cover yourselves to make sure that all of your policies are clear, and it helps in the back end side if you ever have a student who has issues or maybe doesn't pass, or that if you have your policies in place, they've looked at them. And I guess another key there would be good student orientation. Make sure there's a way that they're looking at all those policies and that they have at least seen them, and you can refer back to them as well. But having that handbook available is really good. And if they've signed it, we know sometimes students sign things without really reading it, but it's to their benefit for you to let them know that those resources are available. They need to read over them and not to sign it until they've looked at everything. But once that you have that signature, that's them telling you that they have looked at it and that it is there. So make sure that you have everything you want them to know in those handbooks. In terms of clinical resources, you need to make sure all your clinical contracts are current and signed. For the most part, that's been pretty good. We do have some that with the signing, some have evergreen contracts, and sometimes those are a little harder to pin down that where those signatures happen, but just make sure those are all current and that you have them if you're working with new sites. A reminder that in terms of our regulations, the two that we have that are the most specific, no more than 15% of a course should be observation hours. And precepted experiences are, the regulation reads a little differently. It's no more than 20% of clinical hours for the program. And that excludes capstone. We know capstone is generally a precepted experience, but that kind of, the 20% rule applies to the rest of the hours exclusive of capstone. Preceptors, one of the things that, and we'll talk about this a little more with the annual report, but when you have preceptors listed that you turn in with your annual report, we want to see the preceptors that were current in the last year. And we know that some of you have a list of preceptors that you might use, and maybe this year because of COVID you didn't. And I think some of you did ask me if you had planned to use them. Some of you already had them on the list, and that's fine. But for the most part, what we're looking for on the annual report is your list of current preceptors that you've used in the year that you're reporting on, so that we know where those preceptors are, what kind of facilities they're working for, and we don't have not trying to dig through ones that may not be current. So just kind of a reminder to keep those current. Make sure you have a process in place for preceptors to be oriented to their role as a preceptor, and that's documented for you, and that you have and make sure that plan is in place to make sure that happens. Oops, go back. Curriculum. I think the one major thing I want to say about this is in the evaluation piece. One of the big responsibilities you have as administrator is oversight for development and implementation of a written plan. That's your overall master evaluation plan, program evaluation plan, whatever you call it, but it's that systematic evaluation of your whole program. And so what that plan does is it provides evidence of that you're doing evaluation, you're looking for effectiveness, and that you're using that data for ongoing program improvement. Probably this is one of the big areas that I get a lot of questions on whenever we do site visits, that we spend a lot of time on because it's very important. For those of you who are with a program that's accredited, most of you have a plan in place because accreditation requires that you have that. I think the big say there, and I haven't seen a lot of issues with it, is just to make sure that your KSBN regulations of your, that you're meeting the requirements of your regulatory body as well as your accrediting body. but we don't have a specific format that we require you to use. But what we would like for you to do is be inclusive. And so one of the things I wanted to do that's kind of a little different from the past is I just want to take a minute. And before I start talking about this, I have 2 resources that I've been able to put together on the program evaluation. And because of the way we're doing this particular webinar, we don't have as the interaction that we might want to on the back and forth. But let me just talk a little bit about what needs to be in the plan. And then what I'm going to provide for you, and I can send this out, and I'm going to take just a brief time out here, and something I should have said right up front. If you have questions, we'd like for you to put those in the Q&A section rather than the chat, so that we know that there are questions that I can address. And we're going to get to a couple points here where we'll stop and look at the Q&A and see if there are questions. So there might be one after this, but just, it's okay to use the chat for things if there are other things going on. But specifically, if you have something you want me to address, if you would put that in the Q&A, that would be very helpful. So the program evaluation plan, what should it include? You've got to look at what components are going to be evaluated, and you're looking at your whole program. So it's the pieces of your program. It's your overall mission philosophy. It's your faculty. It's the students. It's the outcomes. So those are all pieces. Methodology, how is the data going to be collected? How often are you going to collect it? What's reasonable? What's responsible? Making sure there's a responsible person for the data collection, or a responsible tool, or how is that going to be collected, and who's responsible for making sure that that data gets collected and reported. And then looking at your indicators of the program, and if your teaching is effective, what benchmarks are there for you, and what do you want to achieve? What needs to be the benchmark when you're working with programs? So that's what's included. And again, not to read through everything, but the steps of the evaluation, it's really not different. The who, what, when, where, why, having that benchmark. The big pieces here that where we find is once you get that evaluation plan put together, that's important, because you need to know where you're going. What do I need to be looking at to make sure my program is effective? One of the things that's currently being done with NCSBN is they've been looking at this for about the last four years or so, but they've been doing a lot of review on what makes an effective nursing program. And they've been looking at they've used literature, they've used Delphi studies to dig into annual reports and site visit reports from all over the country over the last 3 to 5 years. And they've been looking for things that besides NCLEX, besides first-time pass rates, that have an impact on determining whether a program is successful or not. So the evaluation process, and we're going to be talking about that annual report or about the annual program effectiveness. I'm going to be making that available, talking more with the board about that at the next board meeting as well. Because I think one of the things it does is when we're looking at outcomes, we've got to be looking at the right data. What are we looking at to try to key in if our program is getting into trouble, or are we doing okay? And some of those benchmarks, if anybody has an interest, and I will put a link, I think I have it later in the slide, a link to the NCSBN website where those program effectiveness indicators are. But I think those are really good things. NCSBN has some great resources for that. But what I'm going to also do is put on our website, I have a sample, I have a kind of a page of things to think about for your evaluation plan, and then a sample of a template for how you might put that evaluation plan together. Again, this is not prescripted in our regulations in terms of how it looks, but it might give you a place to start. If I have had questions from people, how do I start? What do I look at? So instead of reinventing the wheel, we've kind of tried to give you some instructions to kind of help you at least start thinking about it, and then a template that you can use to, if you don't currently have one, that might help you look at things more like you want to. So I'll have those two things available on the website. If anybody wants them directly, I'm glad to email those out to you as well. So I think that's what I want to say about that. The program evaluation piece is really important. It's one of the things we look at to make sure that the policies you have in place and the things about curriculum, that everything's being looked at, that you're looking at it, make sure it's part of your faculty discussions, because we're looking not only that you have the data and that it's there, but you're using it for your ongoing evaluation. And so as a program administrator, that's a really important piece for you to know, that your faculty knows that what data is out there and what's being looked at and how that factors into what they're doing. Okay, before I start into the education forms, Colton, can you tell me, is there anything in Q&A right now?
Yeah, we got a few.
Okay.
Are you not able to click into that?
Well, I'm trying to find it here.
I can read them if you want me to, Janelle.
I think I got him, Chelsea, thanks. I wasn't sure if I could pull them up. The question first I'm seeing is, are there any guidelines on how old a contract can be? And some hospitals just want ongoing. I think it's fine. You have to look at when the initial one was done. If it says it's an evergreen contract, that it's renewable unless somebody says differently, as long as it has an original date on it and a signature, we have found that to be okay. So yeah, so just make sure you have at least a link to the original contract, the fact that make sure it's known that it isn't evergreen, that it goes on until one or the other breaks that contract. So that should be all right. I'm not clear where to find the link to the new IV therapy regs. Okay, give me just a second and I'm going to have Colton go. We're going to go back to the website really quickly. And the other question is, does KSBN require a specific education level for preceptors, specifically for ADN? And what I've seen on this is, no, we do not. We just say they need to be an actively licensed nurse, and that they have to have orientation. And I'd say for ADN level, it's what I've kind of talked with other programs about. If you have an ADN program, if your preceptor needs to be at least an ADN level or above, they're doing the work that license or that student is going to be doing. And I have seen some at the ADN level. A lot of them look for BSN or above, but if you look at what your preceptor is intended to do, you need to have someone who, that you feel like is a good role model and will be a good a person to pair that student for experience with. So, but we do not specify education level, but that's just something to keep in mind. If you have an ADN student, you want to make sure, I would think that your preceptor is ADN or above. Okay. So I think that's the questions we have there. And I'm going to have Colton go to the website, if you would, please.
Okay.
Okay. So under, I believe it's legal. I think we've changed it. Or no, maybe it's in, where did we put the Nurse Practice Act? Did we put it under legal resources? Under resources, then legal resources, Nurse Practice Act. If you click there, it will bring up the page there. So when I talked about download the Nurse Practice Act, you can do that. That's going to be the 2018 version. To look for a new regulation, you can click on the Kansas Secretary of State site. That's the site that does the regulations. The Kansas legislature is when we have new statutes, which are usually not quite as frequent. But if you click on the Kansas Secretary of State, the regulation, it will take you to their webpage.
There we go.
And here's where you select the agency, which all of our, if you look, we're agency 60, and you know by all of our regs are 60 dash whatever. So you click on the Kansas Board of Nursing. You have to select the article that you're looking for, and it does have, and I think our IV for practical nurses is down in Article 16. Those are the new ones. So you can click on that, and then if you don't have a particular regulation you want to look for, I think if you just click, you can click any of them, or if you just click search right then, I think it will bring up the first one. Yeah, and then you can just click on which one you want to look at. So that's how you get the most up to date. So these IV therapy regs are the current and the most up to date. What we have in the downloadable version, we're trying to put something together that would allow you to print at any one time the most recent version, but that's it's a little bit trickier than it sounds. So we have just made these links available so that you can go directly to the regulation website, and you can print off the printable, if you over on the right hand side where it says printable format, you can print off any of those regulations that come out. So I usually suggest, and what I do is whenever we have one that comes across at the board where we know that that has been approved and is getting ready to change, I go out to this website, and that's where I print off my version so that I always have the most current. And I hope that answers that question. Thank you for asking that. That is a little trickier than I sometimes want to think it is. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to keep moving here then. And all right, so what I'd like to do next is talk about the education forms. And the reason these are, you're going to hear a lot about these if you haven't already. The faculty qualification report, the degree plan hire exception, and then the curriculum change requests and test before transcript is, I think Ray's going to talk about that a little bit, but these are the forms in terms of education that you probably will be using the most. And the FQR probably is the biggest one there. So the regulation 60-2-103 is the one that says that every new faculty member who is hired or is a current faculty member that has a change in status. And when I say a change in status, if they change from full-time to part-time or part-time to adjunct or adjunct to full-time, that's a change in status. If they go from an MSN to a DNP degree, that's a change in status. So those are the two things I can think of where an update might be needed. Some have asked me if they need to send an update if they change what they're teaching. And that's not necessarily, because sometimes I know your faculty can be a little flexible. Some will teach one course one semester and then they may not the next. And somebody may get hired who has that more as a specialty. So we know that scope changes and can change. But the primary reasons I would see an update FQR being needed for someone who's a current faculty is if they have a degree plan and they complete the degree, or they have a change in employment status, and that's the full-time, part-time adjunct status. So FQRs are supposed to be done on each faculty member, and that's your adjunct as well. And they should be submitted within 30 days of appointment or when that faculty person is hired. Whenever you send a new FQR, we need you to send the transcripts for starting with original RN licensure. So even if you have someone who's a DNP, degreed advanced practice nurse, we still need the transcript for their original licensure. And it's important, I guess this is a piece we don't need the original transcript. We can have a copy of it, but it does need to be the original transcript and not an unofficial. So you need to keep the original transcript with the faculty files. That's that is in regulation. You can send us a copy, that's fine, but just make sure it's a copy of the original transcript that has the degree and the information for that degree and date. So the transcripts for the original licensure and then any further education, nursing education, or education that would impact their hiring as a faculty member. So I would just say anything from their original RN licensure and any degree above that, you'll need a transcript for. And so when you do that original FQR, you need to have those transcripts ready to go. So let me talk a little bit about the new electronic process. We have gotten to the point, and Chelsea may have to help me here because she's more on the background and I have to ask her a lot of questions too. But when you go on the website, it says before you get into the actual forms, if you read the beginning, we need you to submit an FQR whenever you are sending a higher exception or a change. If it's a change in degree plan, then we need you to refill out. That would be an update FQR. So even though the system will let you go in and do the higher exception all by itself, if we don't, we also need the FQR to put it with. If you think about it this way, a higher exception is basically saying that for 1 year, we're going to allow this person to be an approved faculty member based on whatever the higher exception is for. So the FQR and the higher exception are good for that 1 year. So if you resubmit a higher exception for them, you also need to resubmit the FQR. It can be an update and maybe their status hasn't changed, but if anything else changes, if the clinical place where they're working has changed or if their education has changed. The other piece that's important here too is if you have someone who doesn't meet regulatory requirements for faculty, but they are in school and they do have a degree plan to get there. So if you have a person who's a BSN who is working on their MSN right now, as long as they are actively enrolled in a program and working on a plan, you do not need to have a higher exception as well. You just have to submit the degree plan. So everybody needs the higher exception or the faculty qualification report. And then if they don't meet the requirements, they either need a degree plan or a higher exception. So that's just kind of to clarify that. So in the process online, filling out the faculty qualification report first, adding the transcripts, and then going to either your higher exception or degree plan. Once you're in one of those, it will ask you to submit it. Once you hit submit, then it goes to the page that has you upload the documents that you need. The FQR will not go through without a document attached. And the one little glitch that I have found, but we're not making a change in the process because I think for the most part, we need to keep it that way, is if you have an update FQR on a person who hasn't changed anything except that they've gone from part-time to full-time, you can either attach an old FQR form to show me that before they were full-time and now they're going to part-time or whatever, or you can reattach a transcript. If we've already got it, we don't really need it again, but you have to attach something. So even a Word document that says this is an update for full-time to part-time status and attach it, but it has to have that attachment. If you know we have their transcripts, that's fine. If you're not sure, you can go ahead and resend them. We're okay with that as well, but it does have to have an attachment or it will not go through. If you do not get a notification that you have submitted the FQR, then it hasn't gone through. Is that correct, Chelsea?
Yep. So you'll get a pop-up notice box that says, thank you for your submission. And then you'll also receive an automatic email from me that confirms that you've submitted your FQR.
Okay, great, thank you. So if you do not get that message back that says we've gotten it, then something didn't go through correctly and we did not get that FQR. So on the other side of that, you still need to have that approval once that all has been submitted. So what our process is once we get those submissions, everything is there, you will get an email back from me along with that will include your FQR that says it's approved. If it's a higher exception, it will have the dates that it's approved for. If it's a degree plan, it will say that if that's been approved. If I don't have all the documentation, I will send you that same email back, but I will tell you that it won't say approved. It will say you still need to do this. And I usually try to write in the top that it's incomplete so that you know something needs to be done. It's still a process for me, but I've been trying to indicate whether it's an approved one, an incomplete one, or something else. But those are the two things I can think of. So once you have that approval back, you can either print that page and put it with your faculty file, or for those of you who keep electronic files, you can just keep it with your electronic file. But you can take those emails and convert them into a PDF so that you have that approval on a PDF document that you can store with your faculty information if that's helpful for you, instead of having it in an email somewhere. So that's, or you can print it and put it with your files if you have your paper files. So I'm going to take a moment here, and it doesn't look like there's any Q&A yet. So I'm going to keep going. If there are questions, like I said, just put them in that Q&A part. So I kind of already talked about this, but a higher exception is needed if a person doesn't meet the educational requirements that are in the regs. And remember that they expire after 1 year. So one of the things we keep track of and we ask for on your annual report is kind of a listing of how many higher exceptions do you have? How many did you have this year? And I do have, we do some, one of the things that takes a while when we're looking at annual reports is I do a, I'm missing my word, reconciliation of your annual report documentation and an FQR database that we keep on all current faculty. So I do kind of look to see that, and in some cases I have a lot of people who are under higher exceptions that haven't had a current one in 3 or 4 or 5 years, but they've also never been removed from our FQR list. So that's something for you to think about as you think about annual report, is if you have someone who you used for a year as a higher exception, but is not being utilized anymore to pull them off. Or if you are utilizing them for another year, some way for you to note where your higher exceptions are, what dates they're approved for, and to make sure you get that reapproval done. If you're using them for another year, get that new one done so that they don't run out of that approval. Again, our regs have what's required for them to teach. So if they don't meet it, there is a regulation that does allow you to do an exception. And at the current time, we do not have a number of times that you can use the same person for a higher exception. One of the things I've seen on a couple of higher exception forms that I would continue to encourage, and I know not every person that you hire as an adjunct wants to go on in school, but some of you have people you've been using for several years now, and I know that you encourage them to go back and get their degrees because they make great educators. But just to also note that we do not limit that, but we do want you to, be encouraging if you can for our future, that we can get more educators. The other thing I will say is on the other side of that, and I do realize COVID's put a little bit of a pressure on clinical faculty that we haven't had before. And I know that you all are aware of this too, but right now, Kansas does not have anything in their regulations that says that for somebody to be hired as faculty, that on a hire exception, that you hire someone who has, say more than 2 years of experience or 3 or whatever. Some regulations, such state regulations say that you can't hire somebody as an adjunct unless they have a certain amount of experience, a certain amount of time in a clinical area. But I know that most of you try to be really, really aware, but we've got some that are pushing really close to the edge of maybe not having been a nurse not quite a year. But they maybe graduated from your program, so they understand it, and being really aware that and some of them are really wanting to go on and become educators, but they also need some practice experience. And if these are folks working closely with your students and your other faculty, to keep in mind that maybe even if the regulation doesn't have a period of time, to be looking at what your comfort level is, and for your school, what you might want to require in an adjunct who are working with your students. So just kind of a plug for, I haven't been made aware of any issues. And in fact, I've heard some really good things about, having some younger or those just more newly out of school sometimes is helpful, but to be aware of and to keep in mind. On the degree plan, we still have a form out on the website that's a degree plan form that you can complete. But most of the time, what we have now on the website that you fill out and attaching a degree plan that the school provides is plenty. We are really, the biggest things the regulation is concerned about is where are they employed? So that's you all are employing them to work for you. What school are they going to? What kind of degree plan are they on? So are they getting an MSN in education? Are they doing a DNP for family practice? And then what is their planned study? How long is it going to be before they graduate? Because one of the regulations is they need to complete that within 6 years. The other piece of that is if they get into a program and they decide to sit out a semester or even sit out a year, you need to be aware of that, because then they need to go to a higher exception rather than a degree plan if they're not actively involved in that education. And I also don't need you to send a transcript every time they update, but we do require one at least when they finish, or if they do sit out for a year or so, you might want to, you need to submit the updated plan so we know when that, because it's going to change their graduation date, and we still want to make sure it's within that 6 years of hire. Okay. Any questions? Again, it doesn't look like, it sounds like for the most part, the process is working well, and I commend you all for being patient. For the ones that have had trouble, you've contacted us and you've asked questions, and I think we've been able to get most everybody on board, and it seems like it's flowing pretty smoothly. I know I've had I'm up to about 150 submissions, I think. Well, yeah, that have come through electronically. Maybe, yeah, we're getting really close to that mark. So for the most part, things are going well. I have had a few more incompletes, but again, I think some of that's the process of not being quite sure that it got submitted, or the transcript they thought was attached didn't get attached. So stay with it. You're doing great. And if you have questions that I haven't answered here, just let me know and we will try to get you on board. Okay, really quickly, the major curriculum change form, just kind of as guidance. Anytime that you have a change in your nursing curriculum that affects your philosophy, if you have a change in philosophy, if you have a change in number of semesters of study, or the delivery method of a course. So if you are changing from a hybrid delivery to in-person only, or the other way around, that's a delivery method change, and that's a major curriculum change. If you have any change in content that's a clock hour or credit hour change, that's a major change. Where you don't need to let us know is if you're just changing classes around in your curriculum, other than if it's a full philosophy of we're changing everything because it no longer fits with how we're doing things, then you probably want to submit a curriculum change. But if you're just changing a couple courses around, or you've decided to make a change and change one of your prereqs to allow it to be a co-req, we don't need one for that. Prerequisites are not required. You don't need to do a major curriculum change for those. But if it does change the clock hours, if you change, the only place this doesn't apply is for the PM programs that are using the core curriculum. The board has made a statement that if you change clock hours or credit hours for a course that are within the flex hour portions of that core curriculum, that is just a minor change. So as long as it stays within the core curriculum recommendations, it's a minor change. But if you want to go outside of that, if you want to change something from a 3-hour to a 4-hour that's not in the flex, then that would be a major curriculum change. You're changing the credit hours for a course that's not within that. That's the only place where that doesn't apply, is in the flex hours for core curriculum and for PNs. The other major change would be changes in number of students. So if you want to increase the number of students be admitting to your program, that is a major curriculum change, and there is some documentation that needs to go with that. So any request to increase the numbers that you have is a major change. And a reminder that those curriculum changes should be into our office at least 30 days before a scheduled board meeting if you want it to go for approval at the next board meeting. So that 30-day mark is important. As we're doing more and more too, our last couple meetings have been by Zoom, and our next one probably will be as well, that we have all those things available, because we're putting those agendas together and trying to get everybody on the same page. And we have some requirements too as a public board and notifications that we have to make about what our agendas are. So that's what that 30 days is about. So it's really helpful for you to have everything in. Major curriculum changes are not electronic at this point. So because sometimes the documentation that goes with that is fairly extensive, I have pretty much said that anything that's a major change should be mailed in, and unless it's, if it's 5 pages or less, by all means, send it electronically. But we run into some trouble when we have a document that runs into the 40, 50, 60 pages. Then go ahead and just mail that in along with the curriculum change form. We are working on a way to change that, but it is not, we've got several things in place that have to be addressed before that one does.
It looks like we have a question in the chat as well as one in the Q&A.
Thank you. I'm just looking at that. Does COVID causing delivery from face-to-face to hybrid online require curriculum change? Excuse me. Thanks for reminding me, because I was going to say that. No, the board did confirm at this last meeting that right now we have been allowing changes related to COVID because these are temporary changes, to not require a curriculum change. What we've asked you to do is, if you're changing delivery methods, and some of you have already sent that, but if it's something different than what you were doing before the pandemic hit, if you would just send me some kind of a notice that says, here are our plans, this is what we're doing. Because some have gone back to a hybrid where before they might have gone from, they were face-to-face, they went completely online, and now they're back to a hybrid. So just to kind of let us know, it would be helpful if you would let us know what that is, but we are not requiring the major curriculum change. The one thing I will say is that if in the process of this pandemic, if you have determined that doing a hybrid methodology really does work well for you and you plan to continue it, pandemic or not, that's when you should submit a major change. And that's what I've told folks. If you've decided this is going to be a permanent change, please your curriculum change to say that, yes, this is how we're going to do it. And we've decided to do this until further notice. It would require another curriculum change to change it from that point on. But for right now, they have not seen, I know some of the accreditation agencies have to make 12/31 of this year kind of the end point. If you do anything different after that, they're requiring you to send changes. I think our board is continuing to be open-minded about the flexibility. You know, there's not the flexibility you need to keep to your documented, whatever your clock hours are, whatever your clinical hours are. Those things need to stay, but we are not requiring the major curriculum change for temporary changes due to. So thank you for asking. That's a great question. And we did get that confirmed. So I thank you for reminding me.
And then we had one other chat question. It's like actually in the chat.
Okay. I'm not seeing my chat.
I can just read it.
Okay.
So if you have an instructor who was supposed to graduate this past summer and has now extended to the next summer, we should submit a higher exception plan for them.
Or that the question about extending, if someone's extended their degree from now until next summer, if they're not currently enrolled, then you do need to send a higher exception for them. If they're continuing to be enrolled, but are just, maybe they're not taking 2 classes at a time, they're only going to take 1. So it's going to extend their graduation out. As long as you don't extend beyond the 6-year point, you can just send an updated degree plan for them. So it kind of depends on their status with the school. If they've stopped their program completely, that needs to flip to a higher exception. If they've just put their graduation and their timeline has stretched out, you just need to submit an updated degree plan that shows that, so that it's still within the 6 years. So I hope that answers that question. If there's anything more specific, or if you do have a question that's very specific to a person, if that's not clear enough, follow up with me in an email and I'd be glad to get back with you. Okay. So on minor curriculum changes, these are for things when you have some content change, you have some additions or deletions, a course title change, objectives or outcomes. Those can be submitted as a minor. That form is available on the website, and you can send this to me electronically. A minor curriculum change request can be sent to me electronic. We are going to try to get this again changed to a more streamlined process like the FQR is, but again, we've got several things in the queue now, and we'll be getting there. But you can submit this one to me, because I will be doing the review of that, and I will also send you the review back the same way. So again, if you need to keep those approvals for your curriculum, but I will send them back electronically, and you can just keep them with your documentation that way. But the process has not changed, and for the reasons for them have not changed. Okay, do we have Ray? There she is. I'm going to turn the next little bit over to Ray to talk a little bit more about licensing and how she's going to talk to you about kind of how it affects you as an administrator, some things you can do to help the licensing process, but also just how it works. So if you have questions about that for your, as it relates to your students, that you can ask her as well. So Ray?
So Colton, are you doing the slide?
I am actually doing the slides. So if you need me to
doing the slides,
I can.
Okay. Well, hi guys, my name is Ray. I'm the licensing supervisor.
Just FYI, your camera switched around.
Oh, hold that thought. Better? Okay.
Yep.
So the initial application process for your students is pretty much going to stay the same. Not a lot has changed. We do like the students to complete the online application and the fee. That's a lot easier for us to process as opposed to the paper application. They can go to their portal that's just listed on our website. Once they submit their application, they're going to submit their fingerprint card, their completed waivers for their background check to us as well. Then we like for the students to apply before they register with Pearson VUE. The application basically ties everything to everything. So we like to start with the application. If they submit fingerprints, or you guys as a school are going to submit fingerprints for them, we can't tie those fingerprints and even start that background check process until we have that application. We tell the students to allow at least 7 to 10 days for the application to show up as processed before they go in and check. What we are having a problem with is students or applicants go in and submit the application and nothing moves on their checklist just because we haven't had a chance to process it. And they either go in and do a duplicate application, or they start calling because nothing has moved. And it's just because it hasn't been processed yet. So we do ask to allow about 7 to 10 days for the process. You can go to the next slide, hon. And this flow chart, Colton, do we have that list? Do we have this listed on our website?
I
Or do
feel
we
like we do somewhere, but I'm not sure where.
Okay, I thought that we did, but we can always get this out to you if you guys need this. This is just basically a breakdown of the steps that happen once we would get their application and their background check, either their transcript or their ATT if your school decides to do the authorization to test early. Then we go in and we, as long as they've paid Pearson VUE and we have that information, we make them eligible. So this is really good for you guys to give to your students as well, because it's just a breakdown of the process that they can refer back to. Let's see. I'm just kind of looking at it. Now I will tell you, okay, so for the initial application, it is basically 1 application per test. So if your students do fail, they are going to have to resubmit the application process. They are going to have to redo their background check if they are going for the multi-state license. So multi-state application, it's basically just 1 and 1. So 1 application, 1 test. If they fail, they've got to start over. They do have to repay Pearson VUE as well. But yeah, we can always get this out to you. I believe it is listed on our website, but this is just a handy sheet to kind of go through and show them the process. You can go to the next slide, Janelle.
Okay. Ray, there is one question, and we can probably, it says, are we required to approve a test before transcript if we're not comfortable the student is prepared? And
absolutely not. I will actually tell you too, the authorization to test, I know that is something that the students really love. Those are hard for us though. Unfortunately, that form is not built into their checklist. So when you guys send those as a school, when we do the transcripts, they will be able to see when we have their transcripts, and most schools just do the, we check that off and we go in and check Pearson VUE, and as long as they've paid, we will make them eligible to test. The students have no way of knowing that test before transcript other than you guys telling them that you guys are sending it. And then there is a date on there that says, what day we can make them eligible afterwards. But no, that is completely up to school discretion, completely up to you guys. And I think, Janelle, isn't it that the director of the program has to sign off on that?
yes, the director must be the one to sign off. And if you are not comfortable, remember you are making them eligible to test. And if they end up failing, but they've already taken their NCLEX and passed, we don't know that. Well, actually, I would say the other piece of that, Ray, is we will not license them until we have a transcript. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if for some reason they fail, and we get a transcript that shows they did not actually pass, then we are not going to license them, but that causes a lot of issue too. So the test before transcript, I think, should be used much more judiciously than maybe you would think, because you're basically saying, yeah, they've covered everything. They're going to graduate. If you have any concern about that, please don't do it.
I will also say, I would also say too, the test before transcript is, you know, for the student, that is definitely going to want to speed things up for them. So, you know, they graduate, they've got that date, maybe a week, 2 weeks later that you guys have approved for them to test. So then they go in and test. Well, then say transcripts don't come for 3 or 4 weeks. We cannot license them until we get transcripts. So, you know, I would definitely say that, yeah, test before transcript is,
It's just tricky.
it's very tricky. Yeah. But that is completely up to your discretion. And if you are not comfortable with it, because we are only going to make people eligible if we get those forms. We are not going to, you know, we're not going to have a student call us and say, hey, I want to take the test early. We're not going to reach out to you guys. And that's not our decision at all. That is
Right.
totally up to you guys. So if you guys are not comfortable, they don't get to test early. That's a good question.
Yep. Okay. Oh, you want to go the next?
Yeah. Okay, so there's just a few reminder to the graduates. I know the last time that we did the program administrator meeting, you know, you guys were very great about, you know, we tell the students that there are a ton of students. We tell the students when we're sending them out. You know, unfortunately, this is kind of a vicious cycle for students because, you know, they all want their license yesterday and there's a ton of them as opposed to, you know, 4 of us in licensing. So we do have to have all their materials before we can get them licensed. We try to tell the students to remember, you know, that they are one of many applying. So I did actually also speak to Karen McGill, who takes care of our initial applications. And what we really need to make sure is that we tell the students, we do have to work everything in the order that it's received. We can't put anybody in front of anybody else. You know, just like they can't put their patients in front of other patients. I try to tell them that because I'm like, come on guys, we can't do that. The problem is, you know, they are all graduating at the same time. So you guys are all sending transcripts at the same time. We can literally get 2 and 3 schools in one day. So, you know, you're talking 200 and 300 transcripts that have to be worked individually. So we do really want to try and tell them, you know, the other thing I was speaking to Janelle this morning, I know that COVID has changed a lot. For us, especially COVID, you know, the mail is a problem sometimes. I know people say that they mail things and we just get it slower or it moves slower. The other big thing for your students, and if they have any questions, once they get to the application and the legal questions, they can always reach out to us because typically if they have to answer yes to that legal question, they do have to send in some additional documentation and they do have to go to the legal department to be reviewed. That can definitely delay their licensure. So, you know, and again, when you're talking documents, they might have to have those, they have to get certified, they might have to have those mailed. So, you know, there are a lot of things. The other thing that I think we need to, is helpful to remind the students is that the nursing license is definitely a case-by-case basis. We have a ton of students who call and they're like, well, my classmates got their ATT or my classmates got their license. And it's like, yes, but you know, depending on what you have going on or your file, you know, or what you may have going on with your classes or your transcript or, you know, fees to the school, and that, which is why your transcript hasn't come in yet. You know, there are a lot of factors. So we try to tell the students, this is a case-by-case basis. So just because your classmates have already tested or have been licensed doesn't mean that you will be. And I know that's probably something that you guys run across anyway, but that's, we get that a lot. So
I'm just gonna throw it out there too.
Yeah. So the best thing, and I know for you guys as schools, you guys really try to help the students. I would just say if you guys are going to start anywhere, start with that application. You know, fingerprints again cannot be tied to anything unless an application is on file. We cannot even start the background check process. I will tell you too, one of the big questions that we get is students call because they're like, well, you don't have my fingerprints and I can't test. Fingerprints have nothing to do with testing. Fingerprints are just for the final license. In order for us to make a student eligible to test, we have to have that transcript or that ATT. We get a ton of students that are like, my fingerprints aren't processed. I haven't been able to test, but it doesn't have anything to do with their testing, just their licensure. They are going to want to pay all fees. So this is kind of tricky as well. Your application, you know, once, if they go online and submit that application online, that fee can be paid online. Once they submit the fingerprints, there's an additional fee, which most of you guys know of and are very good about. But that additional fee does have to be sent in with the prints. So it's got to be a check or money order. It's got to be mailed. And then yes, if there is a known legal history, if they know that they have to answer yes to a legal question, like I said, they can call and they can speak to someone in our legal department that's doing practice questions to kind of get a jump on the information that we may need. Because, you know, again, this may be a situation where, you know, we could run a little bit slower, but I can't imagine, you know, what if court systems and, you know, places to get documents, they could be running even slower than that. So definitely they want to, if they are answering yes to any of those questions, they will want to reach out because they can start that process while we've got their application going. Okay.
And Ray, do you want to speak at all to the, just in case students have questions of them?
For
accommodations.
So accommodations are interesting. Actually, Janelle, can you go to the next one? Those are kind of backwards. Okay.
Oh,
so
sorry about that.
That's okay. The accommodations are something that if a student is requesting this, there is some documentation listed on our website that they will have to provide. Once we get the background check results, what ends up happening is we have to send that documentation and the application over to our legal department so that they can be reviewed and either get their accommodations or, you know, figure out if they're going to be able to get that. Once that happens and the application comes back, we will go into Pearson View and we will set their accommodations once we make them eligible to test. So yes, they can see, this is kind of tricky because, you know, we tell the students to pay Pearson View. If we need to know some way that the student is wanting the accommodations. So go back to that last one. Okay. So this is where the documents must be submitted within the 15 calendar days of the application. If we get the application and we know nothing about these accommodations and we go in and make the student eligible, we can change it. But if that student goes in and tests and we haven't done anything with accommodations, obviously those aren't going to be granted.
Right.
So we just really, if that student's wanting any sort of accommodation or needing an accommodation, we need to have that information sooner rather than later. I would say the accommodations is kind of like the legal. If you know that that's something that you're going to need, we really need to know that documentation. Okay, you can go back to the next one.
Right. And just, I think from my side, a reminder, the question that seems to come up a lot is that I get from every once in a while, I'll get a student, is that they have to, our website tells them what they have to have in documentation. And the fact is that's what's required. We cannot change that. That's the requirement that comes from above us. So they can't meet the documentation that's there, then they're not going to be able to get the accommodation. That process has to be followed. They have to have that documentation in place before they can get that authorization. So again, if they know they're going to need it, and they're going to need something from you as the program director too. I believe one of the pieces is they have to have a letter from you if they've had any accommodation during their nursing program. That has to be documented by you, and they're responsible for sending it in, but they need to get that from you, that if they had any accommodation during school.
I think maybe they even have to have a letter from the program director, and then they even have to have like some sort of documentation from a doctor.
Yes, that's the other piece. So if you look at, if you send them online, there, it's fairly specific. Step one, they need the documentation from an approved, and it'll list there who can give them that approval or that diagnosis or that, yes, this is necessary for them with whatever condition or whatever they have. That piece is one piece of documentation. The second piece is then from the program director that yes, they have had accommodation, or no, they've not had accommodation during their schooling. They're required to get that from you. And then those pieces of documentation come to us at the board, and that goes, it needs to be, they need to have an application. Again, it needs to be tied to that application. So we know, excuse me, that they're asking for that accommodation before they're, preferably before they're approved to test. Because if they go online and they register without having that approved, they're not gonna get to the testing site and have that accommodation set up for them. That's a different process. They're gonna actually have to call once they receive the approval that they've got accommodated, and it should be on their ATT that they get for testing. If that's not there, then it has not been approved, or we have not received it. So unless it's on there, and then they are responsible for calling this Pearson VUE NCLEX Candidate Services phone, they actually have to set up their testing by phone. They cannot do it on the website. So a reminder to them that if they are seeking accommodation, they have to wait to get their approval, and then they have to call to get their appointment for their exam scheduled. So I think those are kind of the big pieces on accommodation, and it seems to be coming up. I don't know, I just seem to have gotten more questions on it this year, but it is a process, and they do have to know that that's another thing that could delay if they need that. And it's not that we're discourage them if they need it, but they need to know that they have to have their things in place as well to get that accommodation.
So Janelle, there was just a question. Is there any effect on licensing a student that tests with accommodations?
My understanding of that is, and we might have to have Linda address that in the update this afternoon. I might have to get some clarification, but I think it depends on the accommodation, because there are some who may have physical or some kind of disability. There may be some things that would limit them licensure wise anyway. But yes, if certain accommodations could restrict their license depending on what that accommodation is for and what kind of potential disability that may impact safety and patient care. That's where that could impact, if that makes sense. And I don't know that I have any more clarification than that. So it is a question I can follow up with. I don't know that we have a specific response to that, but I will see if I can get some clarification, and if Linda may be able to speak to that this afternoon. If not, we'll send something out if there's any further clarification than that. But yes, I always tell them it could impact if you're asking for accommodations, depending on what the accommodation is for, that it could have an impact on licensure that way. And that would be up to the board. Okay, any other questions? And I think you kind of already spoke to this.
So, and when it comes to the failing NCLEX, okay, so once a student tests for Pearson VUE, typically what we do is we process results usually within 24 to 48 hours. Unfortunately, our system is really great when it comes to our applicants who pass. We can go in and we can put those results in, and that's going to show completed. Once that shows completed, they have passed. For our fails, there is just under their past NCLEX on their checklist, it's just not going to show anything. And the way that we let the student know is we will send them out their performance report. Karen will send them out a letter saying that they do need to resubmit a new application to us. They do need to repay Pearson VUE. If they're going for that multi-state application, they are going to want to submit a new background check. So those students are kind of at a disadvantage because they get those results in the mail. Typically a lot of those students are like, well, I took the NCLEX like 2 days ago or 3 days ago and it hasn't updated, so I'm assuming that I failed. We also have a lot of the students that can go in and either do the quick results or from Pearson VUE, and they can find that information out. And then all they have to do is just resubmit their information. Hang on, Janelle, there was a question. Is there a difference in application? Oh, did you get that one?
Yes, they're asking if there's a difference between the multi-state and the single state license application.
So there is not a difference in the application. There is just a difference in the fees. And obviously your single state license is only going to be able to be used in Kansas, as your multi-state is going to be able to be used in all of the other compact states. They will not qualify for the multi-state license if they are not a Kansas resident. If Kansas is not their primary state of residence and they do not hold a Kansas driver's license and have no intention of changing their driver's license to Kansas, they will not qualify for that multi-state. So they should not apply. And then again, for your NCLEX, if you do fail, they can retest every 45 days. They have up to 2 years from their graduation date to test as many times as they need to. And then they go into the petition where they would have to submit a petition to get approval from the board to test. I will also tell you too, if they fail the NCLEX, they do not have to resubmit their transcript. Once a student has submitted that, we have that on file, and we just generally classify them as a retake. So we just move everything from the previous file. So it's just application, Pearson VUE, and if needed, a new background check, but not a new transcript every time they have to test.
Great. So I think that's kind of the end of the slides for Ray. If there are any other questions, if I think we've gotten everything in the chat and the Q&A at this point. Let me just double check. Yeah.
And my info and then Karen's info is on the website as well, so they can always reach out to me too.
Right. And the slides I said again will be available on the website, and their information is also in one of those first 2 or 3 slides as well. Thank you, Ray.
Sure.
Appreciate being able to have the experts on the call. So a little backup there. Okay, let's see what we have next. All right, I'm just going to briefly touch on this because this doesn't affect the administrators as much as some of the other things, but we did mention that they're able to take the NCLEX. You know, we do hope they pass in the first time. That's always our hope. But if we, for some reason, if you have someone who, one of the things I'd like to do is say, this is something that it seems to surprise a lot of folks when they come in to apply and they've hit their 24-month mark after their graduation. Time gets away from them, and then they don't realize that they have to petition, and they're surprised by that. So I just like to kind of mention it to you all because it's not something you necessarily, we know we want all of our graduates to pass, but just I think in terms of what they're learning and something about the Nurse Practice Act that they need to understand what the rules are too for licensing. And it's not going to be the board, you know, it's not our fault when they get to 25 months and they missed it, that we're not going to grant an extension. I get all sorts of questions of why can't we just grant them extension? It's only been 10 days, but actually it's been 24 months and 10 days. So I always go back to it's in regulation. That's not the board. It's not my job. I cannot change that. That's a regulatory requirement. So once they start on the petition process, they have from 24 months up to 5 years from their graduation to take the exam. Same rules apply in terms of how, you know, each time they petition the board to take the test, they have to put in an application, pay the fee, pay the fees to take the test, take the test. If they still don't pass, they have to start that process over. They have to send a new petition, and that process starts over again until they pass. this has happened, I think maybe 2 or 3 times now in this past year for me, is I've had someone call about the petition and they are already at their 5-year point from graduation. So at that point, our board sets that policy. Once they reach the 5-year point, they must retake a nursing program to retest. And what that means is, it doesn't mean they have to go out and get a new degree, but they have to find a program that will accept them with whatever admission requirements. And if their A and P is old, they may have to retake that. But our requirement is they retake the nursing portion, the nursing program, in order to retest. I haven't had too many come back to me with this once they reach that point. But then it's something for them to know, so they have those timelines in their mind. So I think the only other thing I would say about petitioning is that when someone does petition, depending on how far out they are from their graduation, when they get to the 3 to 4 year mark, one of the conditions that the board will put on their petition is that they have to audit a nursing course, basically pertaining to areas that they have not passed. So if they have not passed the pharmacology or the basic care and comfort sections of their NCLEX, we want them to audit a nursing course that covers some of the concepts and the basics for those areas of the NCLEX. We're not asking them to audit a course for every single section. They might, I usually tell them a med surg class, sometimes even a foundations class, depending on what it is, but that will cover, because usually they have more than one area that they have not passed. What I get from a program administrators is often the question of, am I required to let somebody audit a nursing course? This is kind of one of the catch-22s. It's a condition the board has put on this person. Not every school allows auditing. Nursing programs, some do, some don't. Some have trouble. Some that are online may have, and COVID has kind of created some differences too, because now that some of those courses are being taught virtually or online, there might be an easier way to allow auditing. But I always tell the students or the applicants who get into this situation that it's not the board's responsibility to find them a place to audit, that is up to them, but they do have some options. They can actually go to an online version if they want to. They may have to pay for the course, and that's oftentimes the downside, is that oftentimes auditing, some places they're auditing courses are less expensive, but in some cases they aren't. You have to pay the same whether you're auditing or taking it. You just don't get a transcript to go with it. But from our KSBN's point of view, that is the applicant's responsibility to talk with the school about what they need and to see if that's available. We are not saying to you all, you are required to accommodate them, because of course that's not our job either. But I would just think about, it might be something, I don't know how often you get, I know there are some schools that probably get this more than others because they're in areas where we have more applicants. So Kansas City, Wichita may have more, schools may have more questions about that. But I did get one question last year and I thought it was a good one, is no, KSBN is not requiring you to do that. But I think you need to be aware that it is a requirement oftentimes with conditions. And so there are applicants that are looking for a way to do this. And if they're sincere about it, you know, I want to try to help, but we don't keep a list. We don't require you to do it. But if anybody does know that they are willing to do it, I'm always open to kind of keeping in my mental list if you have that availability and are open to that. Sometimes I suggest to students that they go back to their school, that if they graduated from a program in Kansas, to go back to their school to see if there's anything that they can, you know, request help for. So that's usually the recommendation I make. I don't tell them that their school is obligated, but I do think that in terms of follow-up, if they've been in contact with you and are making good faith effort, it's still up to you whether you allow it or not. And I try to work with them from there on alternatives if they can't find something. But I really do make it their responsibility to make sure that they have addressed it, and they're not just telling me sometimes I will come to you and ask if you've been contacted, because I have cases where I just get an email back that says nobody will let me take a class. And I'm not sure any calls were ever made. So those are I guess the things around petitioning that I think might be helpful for you to know. And if you do have questions down the road, or if something comes up, you can always call and ask me about it, or send a question, and I'm glad to respond to that. Okay. I may not spend as much time on annual reports as I might have otherwise. We've kind of had some discussion at the board meeting this time. The annual report is a requirement of regulation. We also, Kansas Board of Nursing is a U.S. Department of Education approved board, meaning we are one of only 4 boards, regulatory boards of nursing that have that credential. And part of that, though, is there are certain requirements we have in terms of collecting information and how we approve programs that we are required to do. So currently, our annual report does answer those questions for us. We are able to do what we need to do from a regulatory standpoint from the annual report that's done. One of the things that has become, well, 2 things. One is we did a really good thing when, I'm not sure how many years ago it's been, Adrian probably can answer that better, how long we've been doing the electronic submission. It has its advantages because we can do it electronically. There are a couple things I'm going to respond to based on feedback I got this year for the annual report. Per regulation, the date that is to be submitted is in regulations. So that is why we require it. And it is important you meet that date, because right now, the way the annual report works is when we open that up for you, and once you submit it, once you hit submit, it is closed. So we don't have an easy way of going in, and I say easy because we have to go back to the vendor who does it. They would have to actually authorize it to reopen. It's a long process, and a lot of times it's easier. And I think what we did this year is a couple of you had trouble with submission and had information that came in after. I was able to incorporate that, but again, it's that hand process of trying to make sure all the information gets to the right spot. We know that's a little bit of a struggle, and we've been trying to work with some ways to work with that, but there are some things that are kind of set and things we can change and things we can't. One of the things I will say is that the vendor that does the report with us, they do not, I think it's a state relationship that we have, but it is a process to get anything in the report changed. And some had comments about the accreditation. We do know that NLN is no longer the accrediting, and ASIN is not one of the responses. And we are going to try and work with that. But every change just requires a longer process than sometimes we'd like. But I have a note of that, and we are going to try and get that addressed. On the other side of that, one of the things we've been talking about, and one of the things, we have a new template that's become available through NCSBN that we are going to be looking at, and that the board has actually assigned a task force to look at for the possibility of changing how we do the annual report, which in some ways would, in a lot of ways would simplify what you're doing. It would still be an electronic process, but we still have to make sure that all of the things that are necessary are on the template. So we will obviously have to do some additional questions to the ones that are in the template, because it's what they're terming core data. And so as soon as I know more about that, I'll talk to you all about it. But in terms of this particular annual report, the process seemed to work fairly well this year in terms of, I didn't have a lot of people have trouble getting in. I did have a couple that were having trouble with making sure their submissions were holding, that the information they were putting in was staying. And so I've made a note of that, because we will continue, if we do continue with this annual report, we will be doing our orientation sessions again next spring when we get closer to that time. And per questions from this year, I will say that I have a more detailed orientation for you, because one of the things I found with the annual report this year is that there are questions that people continue. I'm going to split this to the next. Some of the things that the annual report entails, the things that you put in there, these are the policies. Those are free form questions. The lists of faculty and courses. I think where we run into more trouble is when we start looking at student data and some of the faculty data and how people are calculating whether I'm getting some discrepancies in, I get a number of faculty that you have, but I don't have enough degrees to go with the faculty. So just trying to make sure that some of those discrepancies that I've kind of been going back to administrators and asking questions to clarify what their numbers are to make sure that I'm reading it appropriately. But I want to make sure everybody's reading it the same way so that we're getting apples to apples, because what ends up happening in the annual report is I could end up over-reporting or under-reporting student numbers because of the interpretation that's been made. So that's one thing I know, that if we continue with this annual report, there will be more details in terms of how to answer those questions in the way that everybody's answering them the same. And I know sometimes that gets to be a little bit of an issue when you have, 70 reports, and not necessarily 70 people, but 70 reports, and everybody trying to report according to the explanation that's in their head may not be exactly the same as the next one. And I thought we got some of those clarified this year, but we still have some places where, and it's primarily in the student statistics and a little bit with the faculty, because one of the things we're starting to look at more is like percent of full-time faculty and whether we have faculty with graduate education. So what's really important about those annual reports is when you put in your faculty to make sure you have their correct degree, and you make sure that you have indicated whether they're full-time or part-time. And one of the questions that's come up a lot is, well, what if I have a person, this is especially for our 1+1 folks, or maybe those that have RN completion programs versus pre-licensure programs, is I have a full-time faculty member, but they teach in both programs. And I don't know how to, I think that's one of the things we're going to have to work on in terms of, so everybody's answering the same. But if you have a person who's working at teaching at both the PN and the ADN level for your program, and they're consistently in the program throughout, it would consider them full-time faculty for both. But if you have one who teaches one course at the PN level, but everything else at the ADN, I would consider them full-time for ADN and not in the PN. So we're just going to have to do some clarification of that, or whether we look at it from a full-time, part-time status for your school. I think it really has to be per program, but that's one of the things that we're going to try and get clarified. So I guess I'm going to leave it at that. Everybody got their reports in on time this year. I appreciate that. And we had a little bit, I appreciate the responses I got from you all. If some of you were kind of caught as new folks, may have been caught a little bit by some of the questions, but you did a great job in responding. So I really appreciate that. One of the questions that came up is the question of, well, we submit all this online and then we still have to send you a USB with our fiscal reports and our catalog. Two things I'm going to say to that. Those two things are required. That's one of the regulation things that we have to attend to. So we do know those are required. I did get a question asked about being able to upload a document rather than with the annual report rather than sending them separately. Right now, this particular report does not accommodate that. So we are going to continue, at least at this point, to ask for those two pieces of documentation to come by USB if we continue with this report. So that's just kind of to respond to the question. So yes, there is the filling out of the annual report. And then the final requirement of that is to send these two pieces of information per a USB drive to us to make sure that that entire annual report is complete. I think the other things are, these are just these last four, the update section at the end. That's all free form. Those are responses we're asking of you. Those are some of the, again, some of the requirements of regulation for us to look at. I look at all these responses and I'm kind of looking for themes. Sometimes I find somebody who's doing something unique that's very cool that we can share. Other times we're looking for kind of a, are there things going on with more than one program? Who's growing, who's feeling, you know, like for the future, what are things being planned? Those are all part of things that I review and kind of put in a summary. It doesn't necessarily get shared as part of our annual report. Those are the numbers I shared with the board this September, or mostly our numbers on faculty and students. But it is data that we share in other ways, like with the Department of Education or with responses to inquiries, like maybe from other boards. And for us to be able to see as an overall Kansas for our programs, is there anything we're seeing that's a problem or a good thing? Is there something we're seeing being done that we can share universally? So all those comments are looked at and are necessary. And but they're not necessarily, they're not easy to quantify. So sometimes it is difficult to, but I just want you to know that when you respond to those, you are responding. Some of those are regulation for us, and we just want to make sure that everything's in place that needs to be in place. And that's one other way we can verify that, because we don't come out and do site visits, but every 5 to 10 years. So this is our other way of keeping up with that. Questions on the annual report? We'll, again, more update on that as we know more from the board, but we will have to make a decision fairly early in January. So we'll know fairly early whether we're staying with this or whether we'll be doing something new this year or for next year. And the last one is just that one of the reasons for the date, I just stick this in here. If we don't hear back from you and we don't get those reports by June 30th, we don't just cut you off, but reminder that regulatory effort is to try to get everybody on board, so we know who is, and that's paying fees and getting the annual report in and making sure that we have everybody on board. For the most part, you guys are great at that. And for those of you that are new, that's just one of the reasons it's a hard deadline, is that those that we have it set up to close June 30th at midnight. And again, we can't just go in and open it back up for you. If we did find, this year I didn't have any problem. Everybody had theirs in on time, so we haven't had to deal with that, but it's just kind of an extraordinary effort on both parts if that's not done on time. So we appreciate when you are able to get that in promptly. Okay, I'm kind of winding up. If you have other questions, I just want to give a little bit more. And again, these slides will remain available, or we will put them out on the website, but there are some other resources for you depending on what programs that you're administrating. Our core curriculum, we have, we have information that on our website, and I think we also have a link to that to the KBOR website. Just a little plug for those of you that are in the PN, and I'll say this again this afternoon, but at the board, they discussed the core curriculum again this time, and with COVID and everything else going on, they are making an extension on adoption of the core curriculum with IV therapy through fall of next year. So those that are struggling a little bit with implementation and whether they've gotten their curriculum changes yet in for adding the IV therapy piece, board has seen fit and worked with KBOR to extend that to fall of 2021 in terms of implementation of the core curriculum with the IV therapy. So the resources relate to, there's an ADN program alignment. This is something that's been out there for a while, but the core curriculum is there and the links to that. For those, we talked a little bit earlier about the legal issues. There's a whole legal issues reference packet that's on the website. So when students have questions, or if you have questions about what the student, sometimes they might come to you and you can refer them to the website, but you can also look at the reference packet to see what the most updated information is there as well. For those of you who are new and haven't, I guess this is still the articulation report. It's been out there a while. That's been in place for a while, but we still have the report there if anybody's interested or is with an ADN program. The simulation scenario library, you can utilize these information. I don't think, like I said, there's been nothing new in the last year. It's something I've been looking at, trying to see if I can update some links or some help for that. But most of you, because of the changes with the pandemic, have found a lot of simulation resources of your own, and you've done a great job of working with each other on that. Pass rates. We look at the pass rates for all programs in March every year, the board does. And once they look at those reports and those are approved, I put those out on the website, and we have a 5-year pass rate history for you all. So for all programs, pre-licensure programs, they are out there, and there's a list for PN and for RN, and that's available on the website. You can always find it there for your own as well as anybody else's. And those, like I said, are updated every March. Some administrative resources. I am planning, our strategic plan is out there. The annual report is out there. The most current is 2019. We don't have the 2020 out there yet, obviously. But our strategic plan, the KSBN articles are out there if you have an interest in those. And, oh, I know what I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be putting 2 new resources out there. One is on program evaluation plan, some guidelines, and then a sample template. And then when we decide what the annual report is going to look like, I'll have a new document that will outline a little bit more about the needs for the annual report. Oh, one more thing I'm going to do is on the education website under resources is put a link to what I referred to earlier as the NCSBN, the new program approval guidelines. I think that's a really good thing for a director to look at, because that's, again, I was talking about all the work that they've done to identify what quality indicators and what warning signs are for programs, and things that we're going to be looking at as we look at not only the annual report, but our site visits. And also to let you know that our site visit guidelines that are on the website have been updated as of September meeting. We are kind of piloting our new site visit guidelines that include some instruction on if we need to go to a virtual visit. So that will be important for you all to know, as we, especially if you have a site visit coming up in the next 6 to 12 months. We're always kind of aware that virtual could become a possibility and how we might manage that. The rest of these slides on the councils are for all of you, that there are, as a program director, there is support for you. There, CASIN for the BSN programs, CADNY for the associate degree programs, and CAPNY for the nursing, practical nursing directors. And I have all of the information here for who the current chairs are for those groups. And it might be best to get in touch with them about what time their meetings are. CASIN, I'm not quite as sure about. I know CADNY and CAPNY both usually meet on the Mondays before a board meeting. But I've given you the folks that are currently serving as chairs or presidents of those groups, and they are always open to questions as well. And I think last but not least, I will reiterate my information and Chelsea's information in terms of information or questions regarding the education. Again, Ray and Karen's information is in one of the beginning slides and is also available on our website. And with that, I know you've listened to me for a long time today, and I appreciate your attention. And I'm going to look for any, I think I have one more. Oh, where will I put the resources? It will be under education. I'm going to put it under education administrator resources. So it's kind of both your question. So if you go to the education tab, go to the administrator tab, and under resources, I might have to, Colton's probably going to have to help me with how to identify that so that you'll know there's additional educational administrator resources for and I will put the program evaluation plan will be put out there as probably under the same list where the site visit guidelines are. I'll put the sample evaluation plan and the evaluation plan guidelines. Kind of, it's just a little recommendation for some guidelines on creating your evaluation plan. So I hope that that's answered that. I'm going to check chat one more time. Okay, and I think with that, I'm going to close. If anybody is like me and thinks of their 10 questions, 5 minutes after we stop this, I'm always glad to follow up and answer questions. We also, a reminder, we have an actual program administrator update this afternoon, which we'll be doing more about kind of what's been happening in the last year and kind of updating everybody on some things for all administrators. This has really been kind of for those of you who are newer or just had questions about certain things. I hope it's helped. A reminder, it will be available on YouTube, and I will be sending out that information for those who are not able to be here. So thank you all for your attention, and I thank my other panelists for being present and ready to answer questions. And with that, I will, wait a minute, I've got, maybe it's a thank you, but it's a mighty question. Oh, it's a thank you. I appreciate your time, and we will look forward to seeing the rest of you later this afternoon or when I hear from you. Thank you so much.